Hello YouTubers, and welcome back to all my subscribers, and to those who are seeing this video for the first time, welcome to my YouTube channel. J.M. Norman is my name, and today I will be discussing the controversy surrounding Leonardo's dual piece, The Virgin of the Rocks. So I'll be finishing up my High Italian Renaissance videos with Leonardo da Vinci. I'd like to preface now that some of this video is not necessarily intended for the younger audience, and some of the theories I will be expounding upon are not, in all honesty, very suitable for, let's say, a junior high or high school art student or art history students. But that being said, my wife just said that she didn't think it was that inappropriate. So if she didn't think it was that inappropriate, then, by golly, maybe it's not too bad. But I just want the teachers to know about this. So if you're going to be using parts of this video, you may do so, of course, with proper citation and whatnot. So thank you, and I will begin with a short biography as per usual. Leonardo is probably the most well-known artist of his time, and throughout the centuries, he's been admired equally, and some might even say he is the most famous artist of all time, thanks to the Mona Lisa, which even my 7-year-old knows about. It could be because his work is ethereal, pleasing to the eyes, and invokes serenity. It could be the controversy surrounding many of his works. It could be that he was a painter, an engineer, a mathematician, a designer, an architect, and much more. He is the ideal Renaissance man, and along with Michelangelo and Raphael, is considered one of the top 3 artists of the High Renaissance, and this includes all of the historians of his own time, for example, Giorgio Vasari, and his own century, that being the 16th century. He was eccentric and known to not always finish the work that he was commissioned to do, so even in his day he stirred up the masses and had everyone gossiping. His homosexual tendencies as well would get him in trouble from time to time. And you can, but there'd always be a despot or a king to save him, because throughout his life he had a certain amount of the devil's luck on his side. This image is of St. John the Baptist, more in a Bacchus pose. So a little sacrilegious, maybe. I think that's up to interpretation, and back then it would have definitely stirred controversy, but maybe he lived for something like that. So Leonardo was born in Vinci in 1452, and April 15th to be exact, so way to go, Aries. And although I will not completely condone astrology here in this video, he definitely had the traits of the Ram, so passion, expressionist, overall great at getting a project going, but keeping up with it. If he'd lost his joie de vivre with the work, he'd usually abandon the piece. And here's a really good example of something that was almost abandoned. This is his Last Supper, and this other one is another piece, which I'll have cited at the end, that he obviously completely abandoned. At a very young age, like that of Michelangelo, his father apprenticed him to a master, in this case Verrocchio, a very talented sculptor and painter in his own right for his time, the Quattrocento. And in Leonardo's early work, you can see what he has gleaned from his teacher. Unlike Michelangelo's father, Leonardo's father, Ser Piero, noticed that he had a penchant for draftsmanship, drawing, that is. This is how he was able to sell his son's talent. Not necessarily the way we think of selling one's talent today, but nevertheless, he got his son into Verrocchio's workshop. By the time he was in his early 20s, he was getting some steady religious commissions, but didn't care for painting them for the luxury of the piece, more for the composition in and of itself. Ars gratia artis, right? Art for art's sake. However, pride didn't escape him, and we can look at his pieces to know this. And when he reached his 30s and his proclivities had exhausted his supporters, he moved his way to Milan, which was a very, very prosperous town in the Piemonte region of northwest Italy. It was run by the Sforza family, a very powerful and autocratic oligarchy of men. And that is what brings us to the Virgin of the Rocks. It was originally the piece on the left, made for a retable. That is an altar piece that went behind the altar and in front of the priest when he celebrated the liturgy of the Eucharist, because the priest in that time, before Vatican II, faced towards the altar with the back to the congregation. Now, this liturgy of the Eucharist, today, what most Catholics will believe is still a phenomenon, was even more of a phenomenon back then, mystical and whatnot. The transubstantiation, the magical act of transforming the bread and wine into the actual body and blood of Christ, was done far away from the attendants at the Mass. In fact, sometimes, if not most of the time, it was done on the other side of a border. It could have been a metal gate, it could have been wooden, it could have been made out of cloth, similar to a tapestry, which Leonardo painted things like that and made things like that. I will take a brief moment here. This image is of a Greek temple, to mention that the ancient Greek temples were set up in much the same way. The temple housed the god, and the congregation was not allowed in, only the priest was, okay? So this retable, or retable, depending upon how you want to pronounce it, was the center point of the worship, and so the Virgin of the Rocks was going to be right smack dab in the middle of this retable. So, a great commission, yes, to get. And we will see how he sort of botched up the job, and most likely on purpose, for several reasons. Like I said before, pride, that whole thing, like, I know something you don't know sort of thing. Or maybe he just wanted more money. And Ludovico Sforza, the autocrat of Milan, probably gave him a fair amount of money for it. Even though we don't know for a fact it was Ludovico who did it, nevertheless, Leonardo did not give it to the people who actually originally commissioned it. So Leonardo was a genius in the sense that he understood a fair amount about the occult and the apocrypha, the Gnostics and stuff like that. The apocrypha are the books not allowed in the standard Bible. The occult not only took into account the Stoicism of the ancient Greeks, but like I said before, the Gnostics, the Gnosticism, and the Eastern ways of astrology, and the four elements that combine to make the quintessence. And I will go into further detail in a bit on all that and show how this painting masks those elements for those who couldn't see such things at that time. Leonardo had hoped for a commission from Ludovico Sforza to make a bronze equestrian statue of Ludovico's father, Francesco Sforza, but instead was paid, possibly rather handsomely, to paint this retable of the Virgin of the Rocks. And it's the one on the left, not the one on the right. We'll get to that one in a second. The one shown on the left in the years sometime between 1483 and 1486. However, he upset the confraternity of St. Francis, who had commissioned the work, because he sold it, most likely, like I said before, to Ludovico, to get in his good graces, most likely, because he wanted a really huge commission to make, or to engineer, instruments of war. So eventually, in 1493, he started the one on the right, so obviously much later, but didn't finish it until 1508, which is really interesting, 11 years before he died. So now let's actually move on to the composition and the symbolism in the two works that we're going to look at today, the Virgin of the Rocks. In both, we see Mary up close in the background, and what appears to be a rocky grotto of some sort, surrounded by lots of monoliths and other lintels, which, along with the phallic posts, frame the painting in a rectangle, while the pieces at the top are framed with an arch. The arch representing heaven or the sky, that is air, and the posts and lintels representing the earth structure, the home, the abode. In the background, Leonardo paints his usual ethereal landscapes, something out of another era, or even out of even for his time, maybe. But back to those posts, and this is where I was saying before, teachers or everybody talking about the phallus or whatever, might be inappropriate or something for junior high or high school student. However, that's, it's up to the watcher's discretion, or whoever's listening to this or watching this. So yeah, back to the post. The giant monolith behind Mary is a phallus. It is in the shape of it, of an actual penis, and in front are two very large stones, so the testicles, right? This is why I had my disclaimer, right, in the beginning. So Mary, the Virgin, the pure, was impregnated by the Holy Spirit on behalf of its other self, God, right? God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, three in the same, right? These stones are lifeless, though, and they're in the background. Mary is impenetrable. Mary is real and full of life, and she's in the foreground. So this composition is pyramidal. However, there are two triangular groupings. There's Mary, the angel Uriel, on the right, and then there's the praying John the Baptist on the left. They make one triangle pointing to heaven. And then there's the angel again with John the Baptist on the left, and then Jesus crouched down or seated in his blessing pose. They create a triangle pointing downwards towards the earth. And if you picture that in your mind right now, you'll notice that that's the Star of David. Once again, that duality of earth and sky, which I found mistaken, that's what the Star of David is supposed to represent. Now, in keeping with the Western symbolism of both pieces, we have Mary as the archetypal Earth Mother. Oh, I just thought about it. That symbol of the triangle pointing up, the triangle pointing down, is also a Hindu symbol. One of the chakras. Anyway, I digress again. I apologize. So, in keeping with the Western symbolism of both pieces, we have Mary as the archetypal Earth Mother. So, to quote Joseph Campbell from his Masks of God, Occidental Mythology, here all the elemental mother symbols of mythology are united. Earth, the rock, that is, wood, the tree, and water, the stream. In this case, the possible pond in front of the baby Jesus, or in the second piece, the river in the background. That would be the water. So, that's interesting to think about, don't you think? I mean, when I read this passage, I didn't intentionally look for this passage. I hadn't read the book in maybe 6 or 7 months or whatever, and I usually go to other passages in this book when I'm trying to reassess things or something in my life. But I looked at this one, I was like, wow, this quotation really fits well into my video essay. So you don't have to necessarily call this humanism, because these themes were heavily saturated in medieval art already. Nevertheless, Leonardo represents the four elements with his four figures. Mary is earth. The angel is air. John is water, and Jesus is fire. And I'll explain to you later why John is water and Jesus is fire. I'll give you a little hint. John is the water god, and Jesus is the sun god. But we'll get to that in a second. The angel points to John, and so therefore air moves to the water sign, which is John, who then prays to fire, moving towards fire, that is. That creates a balance in the force, the water and the fire. And yeah, I went there, balance in the force. And from Jesus, we move up to Mary, earth, which I think is interesting, right? Earth is above fire, but from below the fire, what comes up, right? Fire shoots up. It doesn't shoot down. If you were to draw this out on paper, you would see something like this. And so this image, you'll see how I connect it all together. And if you look at it really closely, it is rudimentary, an endless knot. The endless knot, which has been around as a symbol for mankind since I have no idea. It's probably older than time itself, right? I think that's pretty cool. Anyway, yes, and I'm having a lot of fun doing this video essay. And when I was writing the script, it was it was a blast. So, anyway, back to Joseph Campbell and his main point on that relationship between Jesus and John that I mentioned earlier. On page 349 of the same book, Masks of God, Occidental Mythology, he states, the air of the desert in those days, in fact, was filled with the expectation of a Messiah and the Messianic age. And I'll go back to this quotation in just a second. So if you're a big Harry Potter fan, you'll remember in the 5th book, which I think it was eventually expounded more upon in the 6th and 7th, the idea of Neville and Harry both possibly being the saviors, correct? Well, it's the same thing here. John and Jesus. So let's go back to the quotation. John, however, was no Essene, as we both know from his garb and from his diet. He was in the line, rather, of Elijah. He was described in the Book of Kings as a man who wore a garment of haircloth with a girdle of leather about his loins. And the rite of baptism that he preached, whatever its meaning at the time, may have been, we really don't know, was an ancient rite coming down from the old Sumerian temple city of Eridu, of the water god Ea, god of the house of water, whose symbol is the 10th sign of the zodiac, Capricorn, a composite beast with the 4 parts of a goat and body of a fish, which is a sign into which the sun enters at the winter solstice. I'll get back to the quotation again in a second. So I'm sure you caught on now, right? That Leonardo was working with some very archaic symbols, and Jesus' birth, being in the time of Capricorn and the solstice, go hand in hand with John's symbolism. So I just want to have that settle in for a second. Now, continuing with where Campbell left off. In the Hellenistic period, Ea, that god we were talking about earlier, of the house of water, was called Oannes, which is in Greek Ioannes, Latin Johannes, Hebrew Yohanan, English John. So several scholars have suggested, therefore, that there was never either John or Jesus, but only a water god and a sun god. So there you have it, and you can take from that what you will. I remember a very long time ago, when I first read this book, so I must have been maybe 20 or 21, when I was just reading every single thing Joseph Campbell had written, as well as Carl Jung, and I was just, obviously a different person back then. I was, that is. And I remember reading that passage and thinking to myself, because there's a little bit that comes after that, which I'm not quoting, but you're more than welcome to look it up. Because it's really, really opened up to interpretation of whether or not these two, existed at all. There was a moment when, maybe it was 3 or 4 years ago, I had this, I don't know if you want to call it revelation, and I was sitting down, and it was early in the morning, and I had just woken up, and I really like linguistics a lot. It's one of my passions, just to sit down and look at how words, evolve and whatnot. So, and linguistics is a part of my undergrad. So I was looking at the word bathe, because I was actually in the bathroom or whatever, washing my face and whatnot. I was thinking as a bathe, and then the word father, right? And then I thought to myself, Both and Foth, right? So the B and the F are interchangeable in vowels. So the father would bathe. This was kind of like this thing, in which eventually my wife told me to shut up about, because she got tired of me always saying, the father would bathe, the father would bathe. Not the father would bathe himself. The father was the Baptist, okay? The baby is born. The mother cannot wash the baby. The mother is recuperating. Who washes the baby? Who takes it to the river? Okay? The father does. So, essentially, all John was doing was taking a very mundane quotidian ritual that had been going on since time immemorial, and he connected it to something grander than himself. John was the father, okay? And that's funny because Jesus is the son. Now, I'm not saying John was Jesus' father. I'm just saying he came first. And it's just really fascinating. And that's where we go back to that Joseph Campbell passage. It doesn't matter whether or not they existed or not. It's the meaning behind the ritual itself. And that's powerful. So, I'm moving back onto the piece, because I know that was a huge, huge digression. So, the first painting lacks the halos, and John's staff of the second one. It is also done with much more chiaroscuro. That's the shadows. This literally comes from the Italian word chiaro, meaning clear, and then oscuro, meaning unclear, opaque. So the first one has the occult elements at the forefront, whereas the second, they're hidden much more, because that's the one that actually was given to the confraternity. In the first, it looks as if Mary is seated and pulling John close to her, and then keeping her hand in blessing over Jesus, while Uriel, the angel, keeps the baby Jesus safe from what we can't see in the forefront, either falling into a reflection pool or off a cliff, who knows. Why is Mary holding onto John and not her son Jesus? Yes, think about that. Why does the angel point at John? Is the angel saying that John is the real Savior? For he was the Baptist, and Jesus was just his follower? Someone who picked up where John left off after he was beheaded. Yes. I don't know. These are all, assumptions. It's all subjective, and that's the beauty of art. So, you see in the original painting, it could be taken as ambiguous about who's who, though. So, who was Leonardo outwardly and blatantly stating that John was the one and not Jesus? I mean, Uriel, Angel Uriel, the Archangel Uriel, was John's guardian angel. And if that's so in regards to the first painting, then John is actually the one blessing Jesus and not the other way around. Because Uriel would have protected John and not protected Jesus. Mary protects Jesus. Uriel protects John. Air and water, fire and earth. Air moves water. Earth supports fire. Interesting. So, moving on. Now, in the second painting, the ambiguity has been dispersed, and possibly because, those Franciscans didn't want anything sacrilegious in their church. By this time, the Franciscans had battled their way in the Catholic Church to not be ridiculed and ostracized. So the last thing they wanted was something controversial in their cathedral. I think it was a big cathedral. I mean, it's obvious John is John in the second painting. He has his staff. So that's that. So anyway, I hope you've gotten something out of this today, though. But before I finish up, I'd like to go over some other things that I liked about the two pieces. I think the first is a treasure trove, or what we call today packed with Easter eggs, right? The angel's wings in the first aren't very visible. So is she an angel? Is he an angel? That is, and the androgyny is very clear in that case, right? But the wings are very evident in the second painting. Is that a reflection pool in the foreground of the first? We don't know. There's too much chiaroscuro. In the second, it's an obvious cliff. An obvious cliff. It looks like Jesus is about to fall off the cliff. So maybe Jesus' own Reichenbach Falls, right? The Virgin of the Rocks. This is his Reichenbach Falls, for all those who are Conan Doyle fans. So does that make Jesus Moriarty and John Sherlock? It could be a waterfall that we just can't see. But we know there's a stream in the background of the second painting, so interpretation is open. And I like I said, that's just me taking it for a long stretch, because, hey, as they say on tvtropes.com, your mileage may vary. So two more things before I end this video. One, Mary's hand in the second is very motherly, but in the first, it's almost claw-like. What to think there, huh? And the first one is like matte-like quality, right? It's not glossy like the second. So obviously the second is much more preserved, or it's better preserved, that is. But there's just so much to see in these two pieces that there's just not enough hours in the day. And finally, looking at Leonardo's self-portrait here, most scholars would agree that it's a fake portrait. Whether or not he actually looked like that or not, we don't know. That he most likely did not draw this piece. So if you have something to add, please do so in the comment section. I'd love to read what you think about the Virgin of the Rocks. Either the first one, which is in the Louvre in Paris, or in the second one, which is in the Royal Museum in London. And thanks to all who watched this, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so, and like the video too if you want to. That'd be amazing. That'd be wonderful. You can check out my blog for more stuff on art, culture, literature, and music at www.jmnorman.tumblr.com, which will also give you a trove of my own fiction that I posted over the last year or two, as well as a link to my Amazon authors page. But all that being said, you can find those links in the channel description. I also have 2 paperback books coming out very, very soon. One is called Puddle and Memories, which is actually just a collection of 6 flash fiction stories, which is actually already available on Kindle. And the other is called The Two Brothers and Other Stories, which is not going to be available on Kindle. It will just be available in paperback. However, 6 of the stories in there are on Kindle. It's just The Two Brothers will not be on Kindle. So in the words of Mr. Garrison Keillor, be well, do good work, and keep in touch. Thank you.